Okay, we're fortunate today to have Tom Block visiting us again to talk more about what it takes to be effective in the contracting arena. In a previous interview, he talked about how companies should make decisions on whether or not they're going to bid on a contract opportunity, and he also described the steps that it takes to organizing a company to submit winning proposals. So at the last interview, Tom, if you recall, we finished up where the company decided that they're going to write a winning proposal. They go through pink team reviews, red team reviews, they write the proposal, and then they ship it out to the buyer. So now we're at the position where the buyer organization, could be government for example, has stacks of proposals mounting up at the loading docks, and what we would like to talk about today is what goes on, what happens once the proposal is now in the hands of the buyer, because I know there's going to be some reviews later on, there's got to be some negotiations. These kinds of things have to occur before an award is actually made. So that's what we're going to focus on. So let me just ask you, okay, the buyer's got all these proposals and boxes on the loading dock. What happens at this point?
At this point, let's just talk about the proposal arriving at the loading dock. And many times it could be on pallets, depending on the magnitude of the contract. You want to make sure that whoever's delivering it delivers it on time, on the date. Oftentimes we would, in the Washington area, where we I worked for quite a few years, our salesperson would map out the distance from our organization to the agency where they're going to deliver the proposal and make sure that there was a backup car in case there was a breakdown or there was a traffic problem. We could do an alternate route. You want to make sure that you get the proposal there in on time. You don't want to go too early, because you don't get any extra credit for being early, because the person you're delivering the proposal to is going to be some administrative person interested in making sure you're there on time, on the date, and after the door closes, that everybody has submitted that's going to submit. And there's times when you may be thrown out of the proposal because you haven't missed that date. But by the time that we get to this point, the agency itself, the government agency for example, is formulating their evaluation team, and it's like an organization that's going to take the proposal. Let's say there's 4 sections, technical, organizational, management, and cost, and they're going to have evaluators designated to look at each one of those sections. For example, if you're a technical evaluator, you may be among 3 or 4 or maybe more evaluators that are, each one of them are going to grade that technical section. Talk about what are you going to do to maybe see if they're non-responsive. For example, a company could submit only one section and it would be considered probably non-responsive. But by and large, the agency wants to give everybody a fair chance to become a winning bidder. So the evaluation team is organized. They will put together score sheets, and then they will evaluate, the teams will get together and evaluate different parts of the proposal. And if there's any questions, they will talk about if anybody else had the same misunderstanding, and questions will then be submitted by the evaluation team, organized into one series of questions, and then delivered to all the prospective bidders, so that they then can respond to any questions that the evaluation team may have.
What would trigger, for example, these kinds of questions? Do you have any examples?
Well, one question would be, you are asked to respond to this particular section in the RFP. We didn't see it in your technical proposal. That could be one of the questions. Or you were bidding a certain server in one section of the technical proposal, and in another section the server's number or name is different. Which one is the correct one? So there could be some typos in there. There could be some misinformation. By and large, the evaluation team wants to give each one of the sellers a chance to, amend any part of the proposal before we get down to actually selecting those people that are still on a short list.
How long does it take to do this kind of a review at this stage?
Well, the standard answer to always one of these, it depends. I mean, if it's a short proposal, it may be just a week and everybody has got their information back on any questions and given a date to respond. Or in terms of some proposals that I've worked on with some of the military, where we've got 5 to 10 year time spans for the contract, there may be a couple months before the evaluation team is completed with the entire proposal because of the magnitude of it.
So it could take a lot of time. It could be short. Again, it depends on the magnitude of the proposal. That makes sense. You said something a couple minutes ago that's kind of intriguing. You said you certainly don't want to be late in submitting your proposal, but you also said you don't want to be too early. Is there any danger? I mean, what would be the pitfall? It seems to me if you're organized, you submit the proposal early, that should be a positive. You got that out of your hair.
Yeah, that is a good question. The only thing you got to be concerned about is you don't know what's going on in the agency. If your proposal is laying around in the agency offices, even though it may be marked confidential, you don't know who's reading it and who's controlling these documents. And some of this information may be leaked to your competitors. And so you want to make sure that there's a shroud of secrecy around what you're trying to do in your proposal. And that's why we mentioned in the last interview that you don't get many questions at the bidders conference, and sometimes when they allow you to ask questions of the agency, you don't get very many questions asked by the people after they have read the RFP. So there's some danger there, and agencies differ. Some agencies are very tight with the documents, and some may be a little bit looser than you'd like.
But the safest policy would be deliver right on time, an hour or two earlier, but certainly not a week earlier.
Absolutely. And I had a salesman that was so paranoid about this that they would wait at least 5 minutes before on the steps at the front door, having eyeballed the people that are going to timestamp it and then going through the entrance right on the exact time so they get it in on time. And you'll see by and large some other agencies doing the same thing with some organizations. So it's not an uncommon practice to make sure that you're delivered on time and responsive, but not too early.
So at this point, you have different evaluation teams reading different portions of proposals being submitted by contractors. One evaluation team will be focusing on the technical case. Another evaluation team might be focusing on the cost issues. Another evaluation team might be focusing on something like the management plan. In a process like this, everything seems to be broken into these pieces. How are the pieces all brought together so that the buyer can determine the overall merits of a bidder's contract?
First of all, the evaluator may probably be part of a team, especially on large, complex procurements. And that evaluator is going to be told that you're going to evaluate this proposal based on the requirements and the request for proposal, the RFP. Yeah, there's a tendency to look at Company A against Company B, but the idea is to evaluate that response based on the requirements in the RFP. At that point, when you score each one of the various sections from the different companies, then you submit it to your team leader, and at their times you try to adjudicate any differences between Company A or Company B at a higher level. Each agency normally in the government would have a procedure outlined on how this evaluation will take place. The thing you want to make sure is, if you're on the buyer side, is that you follow these procedures, that you don't deviate, because if you do and it's found out that the procedures were not followed, then you'll end up in a protest, and you could throw out the whole procurement. At that level, the evaluation team is now pulling together to their team leader, and you're matching the various scorings between the companies on the technical side, the management side, and maybe the organizational side, depending on the sections of the RFP. Cost is not looked at by these evaluators. The cost is handled separately, because that will be a difference between the technical solution and management solution and the cost solution. Then it's after that, it's taken up to a higher level, and you may have in the agency a cutoff between scores, and saying anybody below this score is going to be automatically thrown out before you go any further. And this helps the organization in one respect, the bidding company, because at least they don't have to worry about investing any more money if they haven't submitted a responsive proposal. Eventually, when the award has been given, they will be given a critique, if they ask for it, on what was wrong with their proposal. So there is a chance here. Now, there's also that indication that the agency, seeing that they may only have 3 responsive bidders, want to keep all the bidders into this game to make sure that we have an open solicitation and not deemed as a sole source because there's only 1 bidder left.
So this issue of competition is a serious issue, I take it then. A concern you're saying, if I understand you right, is that especially, let's talk about the government. The government wants to make sure that they don't cut so many people out that in the end there's only 1 or 2 players in the final review.
That's true, and you also want to make sure that you follow your procedures, because when I was in the Pentagon many years ago, we didn't follow our procedures, and somebody found out about it, and a year and a half of negotiations and finally a contract award, it was thrown out. So now we've got a need for a mainframe, and we couldn't fulfill that need for another 2 years because we didn't follow our own procedures. So it's a serious thing on both sides, and from the bidder side, you want to make sure that you're given the best chance to win the contract, and from the buyer side, you want to make sure that everything is followed in a procedural manner, and you're following the guidelines that you have given out to everybody, and that everybody is up and above board on the selection process.
So at this point, we've identified, or the buyer has identified, let's say, I'll just make up a number, 4 or 5 qualified proposals that came in. Their scores on the different criteria were high enough to allow them to get on what you call the short list. Is that what you call it? Short list, correct? Okay. So meanwhile, those companies that didn't score high enough, they've been dropped, and I presume they've been notified at this stage that they have not been, they're no longer under consideration. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so so I presume the shortlist players are notified that they are under consideration. So what happens from this point on?
Normally what happens is that you're given notification to submit your best and final offer. And if it's a government agency. If it's a small contract in the private sector, it may be a done deal at this point. You got 3 vendors, and you want to maybe ask for a new price. Maybe not too complex. Large, complex government deals, the best and final is quite a rigorous operation, because I've been many years as a cost proposal manager, and if you've got a 300 or 400 page volume cost proposal, there's a lot of effort to go into this, to making sure that there's the vendors that are in the deal, any subcontractors also have to give you their best price if they can, and you're going to have to evaluate what you got and put it all together. And again, you got a deadline. You got to submit it by a certain date. So there's no change in a technical proposal at this point. The only thing we're looking at is price. This price cost baffle is then submitted to the agency, and again, it's going to be evaluated based on the evaluation criteria that was given to you in your RFP. So you're always looking again, what is the criteria that's going to be you're going to be evaluated by, and trying to see what's your best challenge to get this criteria in your favor. And then the agency and the buyer side is going to take this information, take your ranking from the technical and management proposal, match it with your cost proposal scoring, and put it all together and make recommendations to the senior committee in the agency. And at that point, they'll make a decision who's going to get awarded, and then make the formal announcement.
Now, I've had some of my colleagues who've been involved in these situations over many years say that the best and final offer step is often a very tricky one, because when someone says, what's your best and final offer, the expectation is you're going to do what? Okay, you're going to reduce your the price of your bid. And of course, they tell me that the technical team's going nuts, because they realize that if there's a lot of pressure, say, with the sales folks to come in and cut 20% off or 10% off or something like that, and meanwhile we still have a promise to deliver certain technical solutions, this could be creating a real problem for us, because our salespeople have trimmed off more in terms of the amount of money that we hope to receive than we can handle with all the technical things we promise. Did you encounter this, or are my colleagues just being cynical?
Oh, you always encounter that on every proposal that you do. There's the pressures on both the technical side and the cost side to try to get to the final number. And the salesperson trying to gain intelligence throughout this process and see what is a number that's going to take to win. So it's a judgmental area. You just don't take your fee and reduce that fee and say that's my best and final. Because remember, we've been negotiating, so to speak, between the evaluation team and the bidding contractor, because we've been asking questions and answering questions, and throughout that you're now getting a more definitive proposal. Now, because of that question and answer session, there may be some changes that have taken place which will reflect into the cost proposal. So you want to make sure that that situation has been understood. Also, you may have some vendors that may be able to give you a better price, packaged a deal, suites of products and so forth. And so there's some negotiation that's going to take place. Now, keep in mind that you don't have a lot of time. You may only have a week or so to get this thing turned around. So as you are spending that time after the technical proposal has been submitted and the cost proposal has been submitted at the first time, you want to start thinking about your best and final process and getting all your vendors and subcontractors together and saying, you know, we've got to trim this down a little bit. So it's not just coming in early with an inflated price and then bringing it down. It's looking at, has a technical solution changed? Is there a fee structure? Is there some way we can package some of these products in a different way to bring down the cost?
Now, at this stage, if I understand the process correctly, you as a bidder know who the other players are on the short list. What kind of psychologizing goes on when you're doing your, the team is making the final decisions on the best and final offer? How do you take into account? You said you try and gain intelligence and stuff. In the real world, behind the closed doors, how do people really do this?
Well, they really do it with a big baseball bat. I mean, I had a vice president that I worked for that had a big Louisville Slugger bat that must have been at least 8 feet long in his office, and he always used to cynically say this is for beating down the vendors. Because we were a systems integrator and we didn't sell any proprietary software or hardware, And so we had to rely on the vendors and making sure that we had good relationships with them and to try to get their best price. Behind closed doors, you're going to look at who your competitors are. And remember, we talked about in the last interview that in our bidders conference, we're going to find out who our competition may be. And we may find out from questions and answers who our major competitors are, because some will fall out throughout the process. And we'll know from previous engagements with these competitors that we know who the low bidders are going to be. And oftentimes this may be an indication early on where you may not bid because you know it could be just a commodity type or a cost shootout and you just can't get those prices. So there's a lot of strategy that takes place, and we rely on the salespeople to get that type of intelligence and the VPs in the organization to make that decision early on and to commit to that decision that we're going to go for this type of procurement.
You've just described what happens behind closed doors in the bidding organizations when they try to make decisions on best and final offers. Let's take a look now what's happening behind the closed door in the buying organization once the best and final offers have been submitted by potential bidders.
I think the process is very similar to what we just discussed. You have people in front of with their evaluation scores in front of them, and they're looking at what the pure evaluation is. You have some biases by people that are going to be on the review committee in the senior areas and also on the evaluation team, so you're going to have to recognize that. There's going to be some people that like company A more than company B for some reason. We don't know, personal relationships, former business relationships, whatever. The important thing is that you want to make sure that it's done in the most honest way in your evaluation process. I recall in my personal experience as an evaluator while I was in the Pentagon, where even though company A scored highest on the evaluations, there was some strong biases in the organization from senior people that said, we've had experience with this company and we know that they can put a good proposal together, but they can't deliver. They promise a lot, but they don't deliver like they promise. And that doesn't show up in the evaluation score, but that's another piece of information that goes into the calculation or the judgment of the people in making their final selection. So there's a lot of judgmental things, even though you have maybe a real tight scoring process, there's still some judgment that has to take place, and as a bidder, you're going to have to recognize this. So go back to what we did early on. What have we done in the agency prior to the RFP come out? Have we convinced the people that we are a good bidder, we're a compliant bidder? If there's been some problems with our delivery in the past, what have we done to correct those problems? So I think you got to go back really in the early stages. If you're going to set your company up to be a winning bidder, you're going to have to do that front work early on in the process before the RFP hits the street.
Okay, so I think we have a good high-level overview of the whole process of the buyer trying to determine the qualifications of bidders and trying to make some kind of decisions as to who is worthy of receiving a contract and who is not. What I'd like to do is to drill down a little bit on I think what's a reasonably important topic, something that buyers have got to be pretty good at, and that is that in this whole process you've described, there are occasions for some heavy-duty negotiation where the buyer and the bidders one by one sit down and start negotiating some of the possible items in the proposal. Can you describe where this negotiation occurs and what the nature of the negotiation is.
Normally, the negotiation is going to take place after the agency has been evaluated, after they have evaluated their proposals, and they've now got down to a short list. And those people that have made the short list are now called in to negotiate the contract that would be awarded if they receive award. This happens before the call for best and final. And what we're talking about here is some terms and conditions that may be still open for negotiation. Recall in our previous discussion that during the proposal process we'll be listing things that we take issue to and bring them forward, but at that point they're not evaluated by the technical people or the management people. These are done by the legal people. So as a bidder, I'm called to negotiate. I'm going to bring in my project manager, I'm going to bring in my contract administrator, I'm bring in our legal folks to sit down and talk about things. Things like proprietary information, how it's handled, terms and conditions concerning failure to meet certain deliverable dates. What are the penalties for those? These are intellectual property. How is it handled? If we want to gain some information for our own company based on this deal, do we have the use of the software that developed if we want to use it for a different contract? Things like this are negotiated out, and somehow we come up to a win-win situation, hopefully. At that point, the organization then will be told to submit their best and final. So these can take quite a bit of time. Don't get me wrong, that just because we're now been notified we're on a short list that this is going to be just a rubber stamp operation, because some of the hidden terms and conditions can be very damaging to the delivery of the contract, and we want to make sure that if the project manager is available, that they're there on a negotiation so they know what takes place.
Now, these are, what you described here then is a physical session where people get together in a room, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and is it possible to have multiple sessions? I mean, are these really, when we think of negotiation, when I think of negotiation, I'm thinking of men and women sitting there with a give and take, and well, I got my position, you've got your position, and so forth. And if this takes a lot of time, do these things ever spill into multiple sessions, or is it all do you try to handle these things in a single sitting?
Well, we always try to handle them in a single sitting, and we try to keep the meetings down to at least a half a day if we can. And a lot of times it'll depend on who we're negotiating with. If both sides have busy schedules, they got to get on the calendar. Keep in mind that the buyer organization is anxious to get this completed. Okay, and so is the seller. So there's an incentive there to get things done. But picture yourself in a room around a table with the buyers on one side and the sellers on the other side, and bringing up the issues that are still at odds, and then trying to come up with a mutual understanding between these. Now, they're not going to try to balance the playing field at this point, because Company B may not have the same issues as Company A. So there's private negotiations, and certainly they're going to take as long as they're needed, but there's also going to be somebody there saying, hey, we got to get this done because the agency's running close to the end of the appropriation for their funds. If it's a government agency, they want to make sure that things are put in place before they run out of their funding authorization.
Now, one of the constant refrains that I'm hearing when I'm hearing your responses to my questions is that the buyer organization must be obsessed with sticking to the rules. Sticking to the rules means that in reviewing the proposals, they've got to focus completely on the RFP and the statement of work described in the RFP. Sticking to the rules means that they've got to maintain, say, level playing fields. They got to do everything according to the regulations, and so the buyer's got to be careful not to stretch, not to go beyond the confines of what the rules say they can do. Do you have any examples from your own experience of how the buyer, by sticking to the rules, can actually work out to the advantage of a bidder?
I certainly do, David. As I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that our technical team doesn't over-engineer the proposal, because that'll drive up the cost. There's also my personal experience with an agency, U.S. government agency, where it was a large hardware, software integration procurement over a 5-year period, and a lot of forward pricing of hardware type of discounting and things of that nature. But in the RFP, it didn't call for any personnel to be part of the seller's organization. And this was a conflict between myself and the project manager. He says, well, I need at least X amount of technicians and systems engineers in order to put this together. And I said, well, the RFP does not require it. I says, what we should do is put together one project manager, bid one project manager and maybe one administrative assistant. And even though it looks phony, we'll submit it because that's what the requirement in the RFP is. Well, we had a lot of discussion on whether this is too risky, and the idea is that we didn't want to assume on something which would drive up the cost and take us out of the competitive range. As it turns out, we were awarded the contract. And immediately after award, the next day, they called the project manager in and the legal people and said, we want to renegotiate this and add some more money to the contract so you can have a staff to implement the project. So in this case, clearly, by sticking to what is in the RFP, we were able to have a competitive advantage and win the piece of business.
So you must have wondered afterwards if you had gone ahead and really bid it with what it really required, which would have elevated the price on your proposal. You have to really wonder, would you have had a chance to win the thing by assuming, well, they must have forgotten to include the labor component.
Well, I think that we probably would have lost that contract because we were bidding against some major players. One of our hardware vendors was brand new in the personal computer business, wasn't a household name, and unless we could bring that price down, which we did pretty effectively because the vendor wanted to make an impact into the government arena, we were able to win that because of sticking right to the letter of the request for proposal. So I think it was a benefit to us, and it was a risky thing, but we stood up to the risk, and in that case we won.
Well, I presume also, if I could just add something here, that on the government side, in this case it was a government contract, they were also very sensitive to the fact that they, by accident or by design, they did not include a requirement for personnel. And they had to recognize that if they made the award to someone else who had included the personnel, that your organization actually now had the grounds for a dispute.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great point. And you would look at the buyer side; they didn't want to stop the proposal process or the procurement process and have to go back and redo the whole thing again, because that would have been lost money and lost work, and would have making it kind of embarrassing for the agency itself that they had overlooked this. So the thing about it is that throughout the whole process, after you're awarded the contract, and we're going to talk about this in a little while, that things are going to be negotiated. And so even though you're entering in a position that may look like it's not realistic, you can open the contract and let's negotiate and sit down and see if we can't get something turned around in one way or another.
On a number of occasions you've mentioned that in submitting a bid, that throughout the whole process, the procurement process, that you have to deal with the vendors that you're including in your bid. These are the people that you're subcontracting or who you're going to be buying components from. And it seems to me then that maintaining good relations with your vendors is very important. And it seems to me, for example, when it comes to the point of doing a best and final offer, and you're trying to, you mentioned earlier that you have a baseball bat and you're trying to beat them up to get them to lower their prices, that you actually you have to be pretty careful about this. You don't want to alienate your vendors on the one hand. On the other hand, they may have to drop their price a bit if you're going to have any chance to win the award. So can you describe in a few minutes here some of the issues that a bidder is going to face in terms of working with and managing their vendors?
In the large companies that, like I was with, it was a systems integrator. We didn't have any of our own hardware, any of our own software, so we had to rely heavily on vendors and subcontractors in many of the areas. It got to a point when you look at a cost proposal, when your major cost element may be hardware, you got to know that you got some competitive advantage when you're dealing with some of these vendors, because if they can become part of your team, your winning team, that can be very beneficial to their company numbers. It became so important with this system integrator that I work with that we had a special office called Vendor Relations, and they would have a list of vendors that we will do business with, and they would call in these people, representatives from these companies, and actually demonstrate their products to this team, give us their price list, and actually have initial contractual arrangements made with these vendors, so that when we got to the point where we were in process of a bid, we knew that a lot of the preconditions that they would come in with had already taken place. So there's a lot of work that goes on between the vendors and the systems integrator prior to actually getting into the proposal itself when the RFP has hit the street. So what you want to do is get your team pulled together based on intelligence that the salespeople have gathered, based on what the agency is looking for, and see if we can get together a winning team. So if you have these contracts already in place with a lot of these vendors, then the process is speeded up. And keep in mind that technology has been changing for many very quickly over the period of time, so they got new companies coming in with new products, and there's a stream of these people coming in to demonstrate their products, telling you what good things are of these different products, whether software and hardware, telecommunications, those type of items. So when we put as a systems integrator, what you're doing is putting together all of these vendor products, coming up with a solution, but you have to have them on your side, and they provide people for the proposal itself. If you're bidding one of their products, you want them to provide the input into the proposal so that their best story is given in the proposal. And you also want to make sure that there's a fair equity in the cost and the pricing and their profit structure. So there's a lot that goes into this before, during, and after the proposal is submitted, and also throughout the contract is you want to swap in a new product that has just been released, and you get some changes made to the contract with agreement with the buyer. So good relations is very important throughout the process, and vendors go off the list, come on the list, depending on their product and their ability to keep up with technology.
So you're their customer, they want to make you happy, so they're not going to be unduly contentious, I would gather, on the one hand. On the other hand, it seems to me you have to be sensitive when it comes time for the best and final offer. If you start beating them down too much on their price and they see that they're not going to make money on the deal, you may find that they're going to react negatively to some of that pressure.
Well, that's true. I wouldn't say it's not contentious, because I've seen some situations where it's very contentious. The vendor wants to make profit, the systems integrator wants to make profit. Okay, if the systems integrator needs this company, then there's a lot of more give and take than if it is if there's a lot of vendors out there that can provide the same service. Or your agency may be biased to a certain vendor, and you want to make sure that they're on the team with you. So yes, you want to keep them happy, but there's a lot of business negotiation, hardline things, and maybe some promises that if you give us a good price on this one, we'll include you in another deal that we're working on. So everything's negotiable in this area, and it's business men and women going against business men and women, and both of them are trying to make sure that they get the best deal. What you don't want to do is submit a proposal with a vendor and all of a sudden they walk on you, and or the company goes south and bankrupt, etc. Then you're in a situation that could be very detrimental to you winning that bid.
Tom, we're describing here with this procurement process a pretty involved process that entails their legal issues, their technical issues, there are business issues, and so forth. So it's all pretty complex, and you have negotiations that are going on, you have questions being raised and answers, you have bidders conferences, all these kinds of things. I want to make sure we don't lose in all this complexity here sight of the fact that the ultimate goal is to make an award, and then the award is actually revolving around a physical document called the contract. So how does that physical document called the contract actually get written? At what point in this process that we've been investigating here does a document called a contract emerge?
The contract is going to be written after the terms and conditions and any final negotiations have been taken place with the vendors that have made, or the contractors that have made the short list. The short list of people will be then evaluated, and there'll be declared a winner within the agency, and then the contract will be put together. Now, this is basically a boilerplate type contract, very general in terms of what information it's not a 30-page or 40-page document or 300-page document, because it incorporates the requirements of the request for proposal, the RFP, and it incorporates your response, your proposal, as part of the contract, and any other negotiations that have taken place, payment schedules, those type of items. So the contract is written. Then the winning company is called and said, would you mind coming in and on a certain date and signing the contract? At that point, after the signatures have been taken place with the people from the company that have won the contract, those people that are legally qualified to sign for that corporation, then the announcement is made publicly. So the last person or the last company to know is the loser, because that's when they find out at when the announcement is made publicly. But the winner is normally notified in advance to come in and sign off on the contracts before the announcement is made public.
Now, when, as a bidder, and I know you've been in this situation quite often, so when do you begin developing a very strong sense in this whole process that we won this thing?
Well, that's tough, because I know within the organization you tend to believe that you've been anointed to be the winner, and a lot of people tend to believe what they hear. And again, I want to mention that if you're working in the government, they want to make sure that there's enough bidders to make it look like it's a competitive bid. So you're going to probably hear what you want to hear, but there'll be some indications that we may have won it, and I don't know how this happens, because the salespeople are the ones that are trying to get intelligence. At that point, we have to make sure that we look at what our schedule is and making sure we haven't been too aggressive. And I like to think of it after award, we sit down with the client and say, let's go through our schedule now, making sure we understand what we're going to be doing. Because prior to this, you may not be the people that are actually going to be working with you on a day-to-day basis, the contracting officer or the contracting officer's technical representative, or somebody who's going to be the winning bidder's main point of contact throughout the entire process, may just have found out who the winner is. So you're going to have to sit down after the award and sit down and say, okay, let's get and agree on when the actual contract date is, because we don't have a lot of people sitting around waiting for this contract to happen. So we've got to bring on the staff. We may have a core staff that has been maintained in place while the proposal process has been going through all of the stages. But if we need 100 people during the first couple of months of the project, it's going to be quite a recruiting effort. Space has to be negotiated, what we're going to use from the agency, or what we're going to provide ourselves. And because even though you've gone through negotiations, there's something that always seems to come up after the award that hadn't been thought about on either side.
Now, what you're talking about now, it sounds like, is that an aggressive organization who wins a contract wants to hit the ground running. They want to, within a very short time after the award is made, to be able to start doing the work that they promised to do. And I'm sure there are a lot of schedule constraints also, so it's really in everybody's interest that the work begins as early as possible. But in order to be able to hit the ground running, it seems to me one of the dilemmas you face is you don't know for sure you've won the award, so it doesn't make sense to go out and make commitments to hire 100 people 3 months before the award's announced, on the one hand. On the other hand, if you haven't done some spade work and you're prepared to hire the people, you're not going to be able to get the work launched until 6 months after the contract is signed. So again, in your experience, how did they deal with this dilemma?
Well, we constantly made that oversight. We wouldn't notify our recruiting or our personnel office in plenty of time and say, this is our schedule and this is what if we get awarded, this is what's going to happen, so that they have some time to go out and look and see what resumes they've received from many ways, like a job fair, that meet these requirements. Or if we do have a particular requirement, notify them so they can put an ad in the paper and start getting some responses. And this is a kind of a tricky situation, because you go through this process, but you don't know, if you can't promise anything to anybody because you don't have the award, and you don't want to bring people on because you've got additional costs there without any revenue. You also have to be careful that when you're putting together your management plan, that the finance people said we need to start getting money in as quickly as we can, so we'd like to have this contract front loaded so we can meet our financial numbers for the corporation. And the schedule, when you look at it from a management standpoint, is too aggressive, and there's no way you're ever going to meet this aggressive schedule. And in many cases we've had dialogue, I've had dialogue with managers and said, well, we will just put it in there as a sales gimmick, and they'll realize that we're very aggressive and we can get this done, but we may not be able to do it. And I said, well, if it's part of the contract, we're legally responsible for what we say in the proposal. And that's where the point where I said, when the contract is written, the RFP and the proposal are incorporated as part of the contract. So you have to be very careful what you put in the proposal, not just a sales document. It's an intent is to do what you said you promised in the proposal, because that's the way you were evaluated.
Now, to what extent is the following a fairly common practice, that when the project begins and you find you didn't notify your HR people to hire other people, or you just didn't want to take that risk and so forth. So to what extent is it a common practice to take some people in the interim from some other projects to man the barricades as you ramp up? And of course the implication there is if you're taking people from the other projects, you may be jeopardizing the other project schedules. But it seems to me this is kind of the real world. To what extent do you think that's a common practice?
Oh, it's a very common practice because if you recall on the last interview, I said that the putting together the resumes for the proposal is a very time-consuming process. And these are people that you're bidding on the contract, but they may be working on another contract. So you have to be careful as a project manager that you notify the progress of this procurement to those people that are actually managing the ones that you had on this bid. I've been bid on maybe 10 projects throughout a year, and if we won all 10 of them, that would be very difficult for me to be able to work on all of those projects. So it's a risk that you take, and the big risk is if that person is identified as a key person and you've committed this in the proposal, it said they're going to be at least there for a year on the project. And a lot of agencies want to see familiar faces, and they want to making sure it's not called the bait and switch, where we put our best people in the proposal and we don't ever intend to provide those people. And I think most agencies are wise to this now, because it's, you get burnt once and shame on you if you get burnt a second time.
So we've reached the point then where your company's actually won the award after submitting proposals and then going through the negotiation process and having the evaluation reviews on the part of the buyer. So here you are, you've won the award. So what I'd like to do at this point is to find out what you're, in a sense, I want you to summarize what you think the key points are that would lead you to win an award. Okay, just review what we've been talking about in this and the previous interview, and then what we'll do is in a final interview, the next interview, we'll talk about actually administering a contract once the contract is underway. But real quickly, what do you think are the key elements that lead to success in winning the award?
Well, let's keep in mind that what we're doing here is we're trying to gain new business, and if you're in the competitive arena, your new business comes in through your procurement process, and getting in front of the process as early as you can with the salespeople, any marketing people that are involved, and even the program or project manager getting involved in the early stages, talking to the agency, finding out who the people that make the decisions are, who your buyer is going to be, what biases they have, I think is all important. Once the RFP is out on the street, the request for proposal, things close down in the government process, and that's not the time to start thinking about whether you're going to bid or not bid. You should be able to have a good sense prior to the RFP coming out. Remember, the proposal process is a representation of your company. It's difficult to get a good reputation. It takes a long period of time, but you can blow that reputation very quickly by submitting something that doesn't represent professionalism. So you want to make sure you got a good team in place, a team that can put together the proposal, can follow it. You want to read the RFP and reread it and question it to make sure that people understand it before they go ahead and try to solve it. Getting your vendors in place, your subcontractors, extremely important if it's a multiple-year systems integrated type of contract. And you want to make sure that you have good quality control, and that people are very candid about is this a good product or is it not. And I think these are the key things, making sure that people understand that what they write is what they're going to be held to when the delivery of the product or the project is take place. So you got to look forward to, can we deliver this project on time, within budget? The triple constraints type of effort, and making sure that we all understand that this is an important part of growing the business. And there's going to be a lot of conflict within the organization over which way any decision should be made, and ultimately it's a lot of hard work. It can be rewarding because if you're creative, this is a time to be creative within the bounds of the requirements for the RFP. But I think it's probably, in my mind, the most influential part of my professional career was being part of the proposal procurement process and the costing of these products.
Okay, Tom, well, thank you for taking the time today to hold this interview with us, and I really appreciate the insights that you've shared with us.
You're welcome, David.